Piali no chime, namansin tonali mahtlactli wanawi. Hello everyone, today is the day number 14. We're getting near the end of our course of number 1, where we've talked about a lot of different pieces of grammar of Nahuatl. But today it's time to get to one of our final challenges. And I think the biggest challenge that you're going to encounter in Nahuatl, I think, when you're learning the language. There's only two real difficult parts for anyone who's coming from English to learn, okay, if the pronunciation doesn't bother you. But the two difficult areas are going to be the past tense and knowing what's going on with these transitive and intransitive verbs I keep talking about. Okay, so in our level 2 course, we'll explore more about the transitive stuff because there's a lot that we can learn there. Right now, we're setting ourselves up to get ready for that. But the past tense is something we can start to cover now. And this will be our last biggest challenge. So if you can get over this past tense stuff and now what, pick up on it or get the pattern after watching this video a couple times, then you should be very happy that I think that you've gone over the biggest hurdle in Nahuatl learning. Okay, so that's going to be the past tense. Okay, so again, for the past tense, this is going to describe something that you've completed or that someone has completed, an action that finished, something that happened 10 minutes ago, 1 second ago, an hour ago, 10 days ago, a week ago, a month ago, when you were young, 100,000 years ago. As long as it's an action that happened already, that was completed, this is going to be the past tense. It'll be covered in this tense. The first important thing to learn is that every verb in Nahuatl, all of them, are born into one of 4 categories. Okay, I'm going to describe it metaphorically and say that they were born like this. They're going to come to you like this from the dictionary. There'll be one of 4 categories. In Nahuatl linguistics, they tend to call these classes. 4 classes of Nahuatl verbs. Okay, so it can belong to class 1, class 2, class 3, or class 4. Depending on which category that verb enters, that's going to tell you how it's going to take the past tense form. This is what's tricky about the past tense in Nahuatl. It's not one form. It's actually 4 different patterns that are happening. They're kind of similar but different in their own way. And so if it follows a certain kind of pattern, we call that class 1. If it follows a second type of pattern, we'll call it class 2. Another type of pattern, we'll call it class 3. And another kind of pattern, we'll call that class 4. Okay, there's 4 classes. And the question you might be asking next is, well, how do I know what category the word belongs to? How am I going to know? I'm just going to pick a random one? And no, these words are born a certain way. So the only way you will know is if you have a good dictionary that tells you this is class 1, this is class 2, this is class 3, this is class 4. And the first Spanish priests who dedicated their careers to studying the Nahuatl grammar from their point of view, they picked up on the fact that there were different patterns, that there were different classes. They already knew this, and they didn't necessarily call it class 1 or class 2. But what they did is give you an example on every verb entry. You see this in Molina's dictionary. They tell you an example of how the word changes into the past tense. And that way you know how to use that verb. Otherwise, you wouldn't know how to use the verb in past tense. So they were smart enough to figure that out. Okay, so we're going to cover the different classes. So I'm just going to give you the words. So here we go. Let's start with class 1. Okay, we're going to start with the word oni. The word oni belongs to class number 1. That's where it's born. This is going to be both oni and also tla oni. They're both going to fit in this category. So we've got Nikonik atl. I drank water. Tikonik atl. You drank water. Kionik atl. He drank water. Tikonike atl. We drank water. Inkionike atl. Y'all drank water. Kionike atl. They drank water. So what's the pattern here? Kind of like the future tense, it's going to have endings at the end. And that's what's going to tell you it's past tense. So here, class 1, pretty simple. Put a K at the end if it's singular. Put que at the end if it's plural. And that's it. That's class 1 in a nutshell. No changes. Here's some other words that are class 1. Nikitak setototl. I saw a bird. Nikita setototl means I see a bird. Nikitak setototl means I saw a bird. Nimitzmakak tlaxcali. I gave you a tortilla. Nimitzmakak tlaxcali. I gave you a tortilla. So I'm the one doing it. I'm singular. It's going to have a K at the end. Another one is ti chokake. Choka, which we might not have seen too much, is to cry. Choka. Ti chokake. We cried. We cried. This ti is not you. This ti is the us, the plural version of ti. And the way I know that is because of the ending. The ending is que. And that's how I know it's plural. Ti chokake. So let's practice with the conjugation of saying, I saw a cat. So we know ita is to see. To see ni ita? No, this does need the K. That's why I give you the little hint down there. It's going to need the K. Nik ita. Nikita means I see. Nikitak, I saw. Nikitak semiston. Next, tikitak semiston. Next, kiitak semiston. He saw a cat. How about we saw a cat? Tikitake. Tikitake semiston. Y'all, inkitake. Inkitake semiston. Y'all saw a cat. Okay? How about they saw a cat? Kiitake. Kiitake. Kiitake semiston. They saw a cat. So see, when we jump to the we and y'all and they, those are plural. That's going to have the que ending. That's it for class 1. All right? So if you find any words in the dictionary, and there's thousands of them that belong to class 1, now you know how to make it into the past tense. Nothing difficult about class 1. You just stick these endings on. The nice thing about class 3 is that everything that ends in oa or ia is a class 3 verb. Remember, I kept talking over and over in different videos about, does this word end in oa and or ia? If it does, it belongs to class 3. Sometimes this should be spelled with oa or ia at the end of the word. Native speakers might confuse this, and they know what class it is, but they might spell it OWA, like owa. Or they might spell it IYA, like iya, iya. Okay, but this is not a ya or wa ending. It's oa or ia, 2 vowels. It just so happens to sound like a W sometimes, but really it's oa and ia as the root of that word. Okay, so all of these words that if it ends in ia and oa, it belongs to class 3. All of them. Only, by the way, this is the only words that end in ia and oa. Okay, so it's exclusive to those who end in ia and oa. Big class here, big class. Okay, so motlaloa, to run oneself, to run. This is class 3. It ends in oa. Okay? So, what's the pattern here? That a at the end is going to transform into an H. Okay, that transforms into an H in the past tense. Okay? If it's singular, it will have ki at the end after that. If it's plural, it will have que at the end after that again. We're going to see que every single time for those plurals. It's just that the weird thing now is that A transformed into an H. So we have nimotlalohki, I ran. Timotlalohki, you ran. Motlalohki, he ran. Timotlalohke, we ran. Inmotlalohke, y'all ran. Motlalohke, they ran. Okay? So that's the pattern there. One extra caveat here. It is optional to add the ki for the singulars. So I can say, I have two options actually. I can say nimotlalohki, or I can drop that ki at the end, because I already understood it's in past tense. And I could just say nimotlaloh, nimotlaloh, with that a transformed into an h. Timotlalohki, you ran. Or I could just say timotlaloh, motlalohki, he ran. Or I could just say motlaloh, he ran. Same thing. Here's some other words we saw. Tlahpaloa, to greet someone. So I could say nimitztlahpaloh, I greeted you. Or I could also say nimitztlahpalohki. I'm just adding that ki as optional. I could say nimotlaloh, or I could say nimotlalohki. I could say nimihtotih, I danced, from mihtotia. Or I could say nimihtotihki, I danced. Nimosewih, I sat down. Nimosewihki, I sat down. They're synonyms. They're the same thing. That's it. Of course, the plural does not have the option of taking out the ke. It is required for the plural. So I could say, we greeted you. Ti mitz tlahpalohke. Timotlalohke, we ran. Timihtotihke, we danced. Timosewihke, we sat down. Okay, so how would you say I said? If I tell you the word to say is ihtoa. And you have to say the K. So the root, you could think of it as being kihtoa, to say something. I say is nikihtoa. I say is nikihtoa. So now let's make this past tense and say I said it. We have two options. We can say nikihtohki or nikihtoh, or you could say nikihtoh. Nikihtoh. You said tikihtohki or tikihtoh. She said kihtohki or kihtoh. We said tikihtohke or, actually there's no or. This is plural now. There's only tikihtohke. Ya said inkihtohke. They said kihtohke. If you're going to learn a center variety, I'll just mention now, center varieties do the same kind of patterns, but they also add an o at the beginning of the word to mark it as past tense. So they would say, I said, they would say, onikihto. I said, onikihto, otikihto, okihto. The next class is class 4. And the nice thing about class 4 is that it's limited to very few words. There's very few verbs in all of the Nahuatl language that belong to class 4. It's the rarest class. You can count, there's only about a dozen verbs, and in the different forms that these verbs have. But in its root, you could think of it as there's only like about a dozen verbs in the whole language that belong to class 4. Some of the important class 4 words are nawa, which means to carry something with your with your hands. Niknawa, I carry it. Niknahnawa, reduplication of nawa. Nahnawa, niknahnawa. This is to hug someone. Niknahnawa. Mama means I carry it on my back. Nikmama, carry it on my back. Tlaqua, the general form, or qua, the transitive form. Okay, they both mean to eat. Tlaqua. So you're going to use class 4 a lot if you talk about eating, which is very common in Nahuatl. So this is going to be the most common class 4 one you're going to use on a day-to-day basis if you're speaking Nahuatl. And the word pa, which means to paint something. All right, let's make it past tense. The nice thing about class 4 is that there's no special changes. All we're doing with class 4 is adding something to it. So there's no changes going on here. So we have tlacua. If it's singular, add hki. If it's plural, add hke. And that's it. That's it. So the only difference between this and other classes we've seen, like class 3, is that it has an H, but there wasn't anything deleted. It's not an ia or oa verb, but it does end in hki, hki. So we'll go through it. Nitlacuahki, I ate. Titlacuahki, you ate. Tlacuahki, he ate. Titlacuahque, we ate. Intlacuahque, y'all ate. Tlacuahque, they ate. So we have tlacua. Add whatever prefixes you need so you can describe who's doing the action. Singular, add hki. Plural, add hke, hkeh. And that's all for class 4. You're done with class 4. I ate a banana. So banana is cuachilotl. Nihcua cuachilotl means I'm eating a banana or I eat a banana. How about we say I ate? So it happened already. Nikcua hki, hki, nihcuahki. Nihcuahki se cuachilotl. Nihcuahki. I ate a banana. Now for plural. We ate an orange. Tihcuahque. Tihcuahque. And an orange alashos. Tihcuahque alashos. And that's your plural. All right. The last class that I'm going to cover is class 2. This is the trickiest class of all the classes of the past tense in Nahuatl. Okay? So the ending here is nothing unique or different. For singular, we're gonna add ki. For plural, we're gonna add ke. This class is going to require that you delete the final vowel of that verb. The other thing, though, is that now that you deleted a vowel from the word, you're left with the final consonant at the end of that vowel, at the end of that verb. And so what's going to happen here is there's going to be a lot of changes to the root of the word. So basically, class 2, we're going to add ki for singular. We're going to add ke for plural. But now we also have to pay by deleting the last vowel of the root. We have to pay by modifying the root a little bit. So that's how far this change is going to take it. So let's get to see what are the patterns that we're seeing. So we saw the word nehnemi, to walk. Well, that belongs in class 2. Nehnemi is a class 2 verb. So I walk is ni nehnemi. Now past tense, I walked. We'll say ni nehnenki. Ni nehnenki. I walked. Ni nehnenki. So what's happening? Well, the ending was a mi, but we had to delete that final I of the word. So we're left with nehnem. Ni nehnemki. But it's a little bit awkward to say ni nehnemki. Ni nehnemki. Okay, the M is made with your lips all the way in the front. But the K is all the way in the back. K. So now it's gonna change this up to something that's more easy to pronounce. And now becomes an N. Ni nehnenki. Try and say the difference between ni nehnemki, how awkward that is to pronounce, versus saying ni nehnenki. Awkward at least in the Nahuatl worldview or in the Nahuatl language. So you walked ti nehnenki. She walked nehnenki. We walked ti nehnenke. Y'all walked in nehnenke. They walked nehnenke. Okay, so you're just adding a ki for the singular, ke for the plural. But the root was modified itself a bit. Alright, so it's not ni nehnemiki. The real simple, delete the last vowel and add ki for the singular or que for the plural. Okay, so that's the grammatical rule. I'm sorry we're so grammatical on this chapter. I'd prefer to be more about just examples. But I think for this, in this case, looking at the grammar might be helpful too. You'll get familiar with how class 2 works just by seeing the patterns over and over again. Okay, so some words end in an N now. Okay, so we don't know what all these verbs mean, but just know that they are verbs. We have tlani to ask for something, now becomes tlanki. Kalani, it's a type of banging noise, becomes kalanki. Chipini, a dripping, becomes chipinki. Kotoni, ripping, becomes kotonki, it ripped. Kweponi, blossoming of a flower, becomes kweponki, it blossomed. Witoni, to jump, becomes witonki, jumped. Okay, so those are words that end with the N. No changes there. It's fine to pronounce N next to the K. No, that's not difficult. What if the ending is an M? Well, the M we saw was awkward, so we're going to change that to an N. So tlami, to finish, becomes tlanki. And now tlami and tlani are going to sound the same. Just here, just by accident. Okay? Ihtomi becomes ihtonki. Kimina becomes kiminki. Nehnemi becomes nehnenki. Okay, just see the patterns of the sounds of what's going on here. Okay, sometimes it ends with a P and it's just gonna stay the same. Okay, so kwapa, like nimo kwapa is I return, come back. Nimo kwapki, kwapki. Okay, so delete that final vowel, nothing else. Nimo kwapki. Okay, kitsopa becomes kitsopki. So no change. What if it ends with a K now? So we have paka, kochteka, tlatehteca, kalaki, teki. When we delete the last vowel here, it's gonna be K next to a K. Pakki, right? I washed it. Nikpaki. Okay? Kikochteka, he lulls the baby to sleep. Kikochteki, he did it. He lulled the baby to sleep. Tlatehteca, to make tortillas. Tlatehteki, he made tortillas. Kalaki, to come inside. Kalaki, he came inside. Kiteki would be he cuts it. Kitehki, he cut it in the past. He cut it in the past. Okay, so there's no changes here. The K can stay next to the K. However, whenever we have a K next to a K in Nahuatl, if you have K and K together, especially in the Huasteca, very common, it will become an HK sound. It'll sound more like, the first one will sound like an H. So, pakki will become pahki. Kikochteki becomes kikochtehki. Tlatehtehki will become tlatehtehki. Kalakki will become kalahki. Kitekki will become kitehki. So it's like the first one will kind of become like a soft H. But we're going to spell it with a K still, even if it sounds like an H in some towns. In particularly in the Huasteca, it will sound like an H, the first one. But we're going to keep that K. The reason why we're going to keep that K is because we're going to try and show the reader, whoever's reading now, because remember, we're talking about how it's written, and the learner, people who are learning now, like you all, we're going to show you and them and the reader what's the root of the word. Okay, so that's why I'm keeping that K, so that they know where that word came from. We do this in English and Spanish and lots of written languages too. Okay, even if we mark it as past tense and the pronunciation changes, we might still spell it a kind of weird way so that we can represent what the root of the word is, so that it's not completely lost on the reader. Like if I say jumped in English, now that past tense ed sounds like a T, but we don't spell jumped with a T, we spell it with an ed. So it's a similar kind of concept. So that's what we're doing in this form of spelling. However, be on the lookout. Native speakers might just write a J sound or the J letter because it sounds like a J in Spanish, kind of. But they associate it with the J in Spanish, like in Juan and Javier, and they hear that H kind of sound, so they might spell it with a J or they might spell it with an H. It's not wrong, but that kind of spelling is focusing so much on the pronunciation that you're not recognizing where that word came from in the spelling. Okay, so if you try and imagine teki, to cut, to teji, it might sound like teji if they're really being soft on that H. So just be aware of that. Double K. A tricky thing comes with words that end with KW now. Tsakwa, or niktsakwa, as I close it. Nikahkokwi means I either raise it or I keep it safe. I save it for later, for example. Nikahkokwi. In the past tense, we have a situation, we have a K next to another K again. Remember double K? It's going to sound like an H again. So he closed it it would go from kitsakwa to kitsahki. Kitsahki. Sounding like an H. Okay, so we're spelling it to represent what the word was and is, but we know in our heads to pronounce it like an H. Okay, not too many words will end with a kwa, but it's something that can happen. If it ends with the TS, no change. It's perfectly fine to say notski, right? Niknotsa, I call him. Niknotski, I called him. Niwetsi, I fall. Niwetski, I fell. Nimelpotsa, I burp. Nimelpotski, I burped. And then kakalatsa, kakashatsa, those are kind of like onomatopoeia kind of words that represent certain sounds. Okay, if it ends with an S, that's fine, no change there. Kisa, to come outside, becomes kiski, came outside. Nesi, to appear, will become neski, it appeared. Tlatlasi, to cough, will become tlatlaski, he coughed. No change with an S, it's fine. We have a W. All right. Now what happens when we have a word with a W that gets left at the end of the syllable? Do y'all remember? I mentioned in a video a while ago, when W is at the end of the word, we're going to still keep it as a W in spelling. But just know in the Huasteca, it's going to sound like an H. And other varieties will pronounce it maybe with an H or maybe with a W. Okay, like Tonati in the Huasteca, Tonatiu in other varieties. But we're going to keep it at spelling as Tonati, Tonatiu with a W. And keep in our heads, a W at the end of the syllable is going to sound like an H. Easy rule to remember, and that can unify different varieties in a big way. Okay, so isiwi means to hurry up. Past tense, isihki. Sounds like an H, isihki. If I spell it with an H or a W, it's going to throw off the reader a little bit. Kwesiwi will become kwesihki, became sad. Same as yol kwesiwi, by the way. Ishpoliwi means it fades. Ishpolihki, it faded. Okay, potewi, to stink, becomes potehki. It's stunk. Stunk. Let's see, one more change is, what if it ends with a Y now? What if it ends with a Y? And now it is super common for the Y to change into a sh because of these patterns. It's very common for a y to become sh in Nahuatl, okay? So chilla, to wait for someone, becomes chishki. Kokoya becomes kokoshki. Etilla becomes etishki. Pilla becomes pishki. Tlaoya becomes tlaoshki. Okay, chias, to wait for someone. Kokoya refers to a type of pain or getting sick. Etilla, to get heavy. Tikpia, to have something or someone. Tlaoya, to to take apart the corn off the corn cob pieces. To shuck corn, I guess you would say. So, the ya to sh. Okay, might throw you off. It is a different sound, it's a new sound change, but a very common pattern in Nahuatl. All right, let's try some practice examples. I had a dog, where pilla means to have. Nikpilla, I have it. Nikpilla chichi, I have a dog. Nikpilla chichi, I have a dog. How about past? Nikpishki, 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 I had. Nikpishki chichi, I had a dog. How about ta? Ta tikpishki chichi. Ya kipishki chichi. Tohuantin tikpishke. 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 Tohuantin tikpishke chichi. Amohuantin inkipishke chichi. Inihuantin kipishke chichi. All right, we had a small example with that one. Lots of sound changes, I know, but there is a pattern to all of this craziness. There's a pattern to all of this madness. If we respect spelling it by showing these patterns, it will make reading and writing so much easier, and even learning so much easier for others. So consider using this form of spelling that not just myself, but other Nahuatl teachers also use as well. Okay, so that's an introduction to the craziness of the past tense. The best way to learn that, of course, would be through lots of practice, lots of trial, all right, and conversation, and trying to do these conjugations in your head. But just give it time. In this video, we covered the grammar of it, but we'll have more practice in more videos. All right. Tlaskamati nachime, timoitase seyo kuelta, which means we will see each other next time. Timoitase.